In the beginning there was nothing. No earth beneath your feet, no sky above your head, no wind, no sea, no stars. Imagine standing in an endless void, no sound, no light, no direction. Just stillness. This was Ginnungagap, the yawning chasm, an infinite emptiness that stretched beyond comprehension. It was not peaceful, not truly. It was expectant, like a deep breath held forever, waiting for something to happen. And then, in that immeasurable silence, came contrast. To the north, the void began to shiver as the frozen mists of Niflheim swirled and took form, sharp with cold and heavy with frost. This was not ordinary winter, not the kind that dusts fields and forests in snow. This was a primal cold, biting and eternal, a place where glaciers breathed and ice never cracked. At its heart bubbled the well of Virgelmir, from which surged 12 rivers, carrying their icy venom outward, spreading chill into the void. Far away to the south, another force stirred. Muspelheim, land of fire, blazing bright in the nothingness. There the flames danced and devoured, filling the air with sparks, guarded by Surt, a being of fire whose sword blazed like the sun. Where Niflheim was silent and still, Muspelheim crackled and roared. These two realms could not be more different. One frozen, one aflame, one utterly still, the other in constant motion. And between them stretched Ginnungagap, the empty void, until one day the frost from the north and the heat from the south met in the middle. The frost began to melt, drop by drop, and in that melting life was born. From the ice dripped the first of all beings, Ymir. He was enormous, so vast that even calling him a giant feels too small a word. His limbs sprawled across Ginnungagap like mountain ranges, his breath a wind, his body warm where no warmth had existed before. From his sweat, more life sprang forth, frost giants, great and terrible, pouring out from his armpits and legs, multiplying as though the void itself was eager to be filled. Ymir was not the only being to emerge from the ice. Alongside him appeared a cow, the great cosmic nourisher Embla, her coat gleaming with frost. She was vast enough to sustain the giant, and from her teats flowed 4 rivers of milk, giving Ymir life and strength. Yet Embla had her own needs, and to sustain herself she licked at the salty ice blocks around her. Day after day she licked, her tongue scraping against the frozen surface until something began to emerge from the ice. First a tuft of hair, then a head, then a whole man, strong and beautiful. This was Buri, the first of the gods, ancestor of all who would come after. Buri begot a son named Bor, and Bor took for his wife Bestla, a daughter of the frost giants. From this union came 3 sons, Odin, Vili, and Vi. Unlike the giants who were born of Ymir's sweat and limbs, these 3 were not creatures of mere chaos. They were something more. Odin, the eldest, was clever, hungry for knowledge, and destined to become the Allfather. Even as a youth he seemed restless, always gazing toward the horizon, questioning, wondering what lay beyond the void. Vili, whose very name meant will, embodied courage and determination, the ability to decide and act when hesitation might mean death. Vi, whose name meant holy or sacred, possessed the divine spark, a sense of what was right, what was meaningful. Together they were unlike anything that had walked Ginnungagap before. But the world they inherited was not a peaceful one. Ymir still lived, and with him lived countless giants, his children and grandchildren born in unending numbers. They filled the void with their noise and their hunger. Wherever they went, they spread wildness and chaos, fighting one another, devouring what little there was to devour. Ymir himself was at the center of it all, his colossal form dominating the empty space. He was not merely a creature, he was the world as it existed then, the first living being, and in him lay the raw, untamed power of creation itself. To live in such a world was perilous. The brothers had no dwelling of their own, no safe place, no boundaries between themselves and the roaring chaos around them. They were young, yes, but they could see what was coming. As long as Ymir lived, there would never be peace, never be order. The void would fill endlessly with giants, and one day the children of Ymir would consume everything. Odin, Vili, and Vi saw this truth, and their hearts were troubled. Night after night, they spoke in hushed voices about what must be done. Odin's eyes burned with a fierce light as he spoke of a vision, a world that could be shaped, ordered, made into something more than a wasteland of frost and shadow. Vili clenched his fists as he declared that the time for waiting had passed. Vi bowed his head, whispering a prayer that their actions, though grim, would bring something better into being. They made a pact, the 3 of them binding themselves to a single purpose: They would confront Ymir and they would end his reign. It was not a choice made lightly. Ymir was vast, a being of near limitless strength, and the three brothers were so small in comparison. But they had something Ymir lacked: cunning, unity, and a vision for what the void could become. And so they prepared for war. What weapons they carried, the old stories do not say, but we can imagine them forging blades or spears, perhaps even shaping weapons from the very bones of the void itself. Perhaps Odin called on powers that no one had ever dared to summon before, channeling the first runes, weaving fate into his plans. At last the day came. The three brothers approached Ymir as he slept, his breathing like the rumble of distant thunder, his great bulk sprawled across Ginnungagap. The air was heavy with tension, the stillness before the first battle in all creation. Odin gave a nod and they struck. Ymir awoke with a roar that shook the void. He lashed out and the fight began in earnest. Imagine three small figures darting across the vast plain of his body, slashing and striking, while Ymir rose like a living mountain, bellowing, his shadow blotting out what little light there was. The clash was terrible, the sound of it echoing across eternity. The brothers moved as one, Odin leading, Vili pressing forward with raw determination, V sanctifying every blow as if blessing their cause. The struggle was long and desperate. Perhaps Ymir struck the ground with such force that cracks opened in the void, perhaps his blood fell in great steaming drops that hissed when they touched the frost. But in the end, the brothers were victorious. Their will was stronger, their purpose unyielding. With a final strike, they brought Ymir down. When Ymir fell, it was as though the world itself had collapsed. His blood gushed forth in a great flood, pouring into Ginnungagap. It was not a simple stream, not a trickle, but a torrent so great it drowned almost all of the giants that had been born from him. The waters rose higher and higher, sweeping them away until the void itself seemed to be one endless ocean of blood. Only two survived, Bergelmir and his wife, who, depending on the telling, escaped by climbing into a hollow tree or by fashioning a boat. They drifted through the bloody sea until they found safety, and from them would descend all the giants that would come after, ensuring that the enemies of the gods would never be fully destroyed. But for now the battle was over. Ymir was dead, the void was quiet, and the three brothers stood together, their chests heaving, staring at the colossal corpse before them. The first war in the cosmos had been fought and they had won. Yet their task was only beginning. The brothers looked upon Ymir's vast body, and where others might have seen only a corpse, they saw possibility. Here was the raw material from which they could build the world they had dreamed of, a place of order, a place where life could flourish. And so they began their work. The void was no longer silent. Ymir's blood still surged around them, a crimson ocean stretching into infinity, lapping against the vast corpse that floated at its center. But to Odin, Vili, and V, this was no longer simply the site of a battle. It was their workshop, their canvas. They stood together and knew, without speaking, what must be done. They had not killed Ymir simply to watch his body decay in the void. They had slain him to create something new, a place where life could grow, where meaning could take root. So they set about the greatest act of creation the cosmos had ever seen. First, they dragged Ymir's colossal body into the center of Ginnungagap. This was no small task, for even dead, Ymir was vast beyond comprehension. His arms stretched like peninsulas, his ribs rose like hills. But the brothers were strong and relentless. They pushed and pulled, straining until the giant lay where they wished him to be. Then Odin raised his spear and gave the first command. Together they split Ymir's body open, tearing him apart piece by piece. From his flesh they shaped the land, a task so immense it seemed to take an age. Every stretch of plain, every rolling meadow, every field and valley came from Ymir's flesh. Where his skin was thick, the land rose higher. Where it was thin, they left hollows that became fertile lowlands. But land alone was not enough. The void was still flooded with Ymir's blood, and the brothers gathered it, directing it into channels they carved through the new earth. From this blood they created the oceans, the rivers, the lakes, and the streams. The salty tang of the sea was Ymir's essence, his life spread across the world. And when they were done, they named this oceanic boundary Algar, encircling the land like a great serpent of water. Ymir's bones they used to raise the mountains. Imagine them heaving those titanic bones, planting them upright so that their jagged ends jutted toward the heavens. The tallest peaks were made from Ymir's great leg bones, the smaller hills from his ribs. The sound of cracking and grinding echoed as they shaped stone from bone, building a world that would last for ages. When they came to Ymir's teeth and the shards of his broken bones, they scattered them across the earth to become stones, pebbles, and gravel, the small hard things that crunch beneath a traveler's boots. His hair they spread as forests, dark and tangled at first, then greener as life would grow upon them. Each strand became a tree, from the towering pines to the smallest saplings, and soon the land was clothed with woodlands. But still the world was dark, for above them there was no sky, no roof over this new creation. The brothers gazed upward at the emptiness of Ginnungagap and knew what must be done next. With solemn care they lifted Ymir's vast skull. It was heavy and hollow, its dome smooth as a great cavern. Together they raised it high and set it over the world like a bowl turned upside down. This became the sky, the first roof of the cosmos. But a roof needs pillars, and so they summoned 4 dwarves to hold it up. Nori, Suri, Austri, and Vestri, north, south, east, and west, each one planted at a corner of the world. These dwarves would hold the heavens aloft until the end of time. Even then the sky was empty. So Odin and his brothers traveled to Muspelheim, where they gathered sparks from the eternal flames and carried them back to the heavens. They scattered these sparks across the underside of the great skull, placing them carefully so that they would shine forever as stars. Some they fixed in place to form constellations, others they set to wander as signs and omens. And then, as if inspired by the beauty of this starlit sky, they placed the sun and moon there as well, setting them in motion so that they would travel across the dome each day. They chose 2 glowing sparks for this task and gave them chariots to ride. But to keep them from growing lazy or stopping their path, they set wolves, Skoll and Hati, to chase them endlessly. When the wolves finally catch their prey at Ragnarok, the end of all things will come. When this work was finished, the world was beautiful, but it was still vulnerable. The brothers knew that beyond the seas, beyond the edge of the land, the surviving frost giants still lurked, and their hatred would one day drive them against the gods' creation. So Odin, Vili, and Vili built a wall, using Ymir's eyebrows as the foundation. From these great, bristling bones they raised a barrier and called it Midgard, the middle enclosure. This would be the realm of men, a place protected from the forces of chaos outside. But the new world, though shaped, was still empty of the one thing that mattered most. Beings who could walk upon it, who could see the sky and wonder about it, who could live, love, and tell stories. And so one day as they walked along the seashore, Odin, Vili, and Vili found 2 fallen tree trunks, washed smooth by the waves. One was ash wood, strong and tall. The other was elm, supple and graceful. The brothers stopped and looked at the trunks, and something stirred within them. Here lay the possibility of something new, not giants, not gods, but something different. They decided to shape these trunks into the first human beings. Odin bent over the first trunk and breathed into it, giving it the gift of Ond, breath, life itself. Vili laid his hands upon it and granted it thought, intelligence, the ability to reason and decide. Vili then gave it the gift of form, sight, hearing, and speech, the senses that would allow it to experience the world. When they were done, the trunks were no longer lifeless wood. They were living beings, standing upright, breathing, blinking, gazing in wonder at the new world. The ash became a man whom they named Ask, and the elm became a woman named Embla. These 2 were the first of humankind, the ancestors of all who would come after. The brothers placed them within Midgard, safe behind its walls, and instructed them to live, to multiply, to fill the world they had created. And thus humanity began, fragile but resilient, small but significant, dwelling in the middle ground between the divine and the chaotic. When Odin, Vili, and Vili stepped back and looked upon their work, they saw a world transformed. Where there had been emptiness, now there was earth and sky, mountain and river, sun and moon, forest and sea. Where there had been silence, there was now the cry of gulls, the rustle of leaves, the laughter of the first man and woman. It was a world born from death, a place forged out of the body of the first living being. But it was also a world full of promise, a place where life could grow, where stories could be told, where meaning could be sought. This is the legacy of Ymir's death. Every mountain you see is a fragment of his bones. Every river is the blood that once ran in his veins. The very sky you gaze upon is the inside of his skull. The clouds are his thoughts, still drifting, still dreaming. Creation in the Norse telling is not a gentle thing. It is violent, it is raw, it is costly. But from that violence comes order, from that death comes life. The slaying of Ymir was not merely an act of destruction. It was the first step toward a world where gods, men and even giants would have their roles to play in the great unfolding of fate. And so ends the story of how three brothers slew a giant and made the world from his remains. But in truth, the story does not end, for the descendants of Ymir still live, and the struggle between chaos and order continues. One day the wolves will catch the sun and moon. One day the walls of Midgard will fall. One day Odin himself will face the children of Ymir again, and the cycle will come to its end. Until then, we live on the body of a giant, under a sky made of his skull, walking through the story that Odin, Vili and Vili began. If you enjoyed this tale of cosmic creation and divine daring, let us know by leaving a like, sharing this story with a friend, and subscribing for more journeys into the ancient past. And tell me in the comments, if you could stand beside Odin and his brothers on the day they built the world, what part would you want to witness? The forging of the mountains, the raising of the sky, or the birth of the first humans? The fire is burning low now, but many more tales await. Stay with us, for the sagas of the gods are far from over.